Now, welcome to another edition of News from Naboo with of
Kenobi.
course, lightning takes. And this is going to be a somewhat special edition, I think, because we are going to be covering the Vanity Fair article
Parts
over
of
the
it,
next
yeah.
couple days, I think, because I think this might turn into a rather lengthy video otherwise if we try to cover all of it. So
Right.
why don't you start us with the news? What we got?
All right, today we're going to focus on what the article had to say about Kenobi, because it did cover a lot of shows, and we'll be going over the key highlights, like he said, the next few days. All right, so we're going to talk about, of course, the fact that it's coming out on the 27th. Takes place 10 years into his time distantly guarding Luke Skywalker and being hunted by Inquisitor Reva. We've talked about it before, but this was meant to be a movie, and then it changed into a series. Ewan McGregor is actually a producer on it, giving him some say over the story. He says, "I think that it should be a story about a broken man, a man who's lost his faith. He always has a funny line to say or always seems to be calm and is a good warrior or soldier or whatever. But to see that man come apart and see what gets him back together again, that's where we started." When it became a series and Deborah Chow came on to direct, her goal was to keep the series in a cinematic scope.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I think, as I've said before, I'm got to believe this is going to be the biggest Disney Plus series to date, be that Marvel, across any, the whole spectrum of Disney shows and, properties. So, obviously, you want to put your best foot forward and make this as epic as, epic looking and movie, cinematic, I guess, not movie-matic, as cinematic as possible.
Absolutely. And I like that Ewan having a say and that he went with the route that is good. He's like, this is kind of a broken man who's had this long life and he can be calm and funny and
Witty.
but
It's Kenobi.
But he came apart, and we have to see how he's going to fix this, how he's going to put himself together again.
And I do agree with that. Like I've said before, I think the only issue with that is, you did this with Luke. I feel, God, I wish they could go back and undo that. I know some people like it. I wish they could undo that story with Luke, because it works so much better here with Kenobi, I think. Or potentially can. And I'm not saying broken to the point of I don't, let the Jedi end or anything like that. But, he is a guy who's living in the desert for 10 years, who, watched the Jedi Order fall and has to believe part of it is his fault. And, you kind of did this story with Luke, and I think it fell flat with so many fans, where if you do it right here, I think it's going to resonate with most fans.
And how broken was he? I mean, his relationship with Anakin, he's screaming at him, "You were supposed to be the chosen one."
Yeah, he he showed in that moment that he believed in Anakin too, maybe a little too much,
All right, let's keep moving through the articles. This is a long one. In the early iterations of the Obi-Wan in Exile story, Vader was not included. He was not a part of their early process at all.
And one could argue he shouldn't be.
They asked questions like, would introducing Vader to a story about Obi-Wan's exile detract from their fateful meeting in A New Hope? Or could a previously unknown encounter actually enhance that moment? These conversations, these what-ifs, happened a lot. And they decided that they needed to keep it, pure. We don't just put something for something's sake. They were pure about the why. Why are we making the choices that we are making here? When Chow asked Hayden to return as Vader, she told him it would add a different dimension that could ultimately reframe the way fans look at their classic duel in the original movie.
But do we need it reframed? That's the question they didn't seem to ask, right? I mean, I'm sure they discussed this heavily, and I'm sure there were some suggestions from above, from Disney, to be like, hey, if we threw another fight between Vader and Kenobi, we might get more people to watch. But, I mean, do you need to reframe it? What is wrong with the current framing of it?
That's a really good question, honestly, which we won't have an answer to for a couple weeks yet.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm going into it open-minded. As I've said, I pretty much accepted the fact, yes, they're going to fight again in some capacity. And I'm willing to see how they pull that off and, how it does reframe it, even though I would argue it's not something that needs to be reframed. It works, right? If they haven't seen each other since Mustafar and this is how they interact, that's fine. You don't need to we're going to put a new spin on this. Not everything needs a new spin. Sometimes the original spin is fine. And that's kind of my original thought. Like I said, I'm open-minded, but I'm one of those people that's like, the story sometimes is just fine as this. We don't need to go in there and tinker and how did this happen? That seems like so many stories these days are we're going to explain why this, you don't always need things like totally explained out. Sometimes, sometimes you can leave room for, the imagination to figure out what happened in those 20 years.
Okay. Well, let's move on the article. Hayden said, This is a character that has come to define my life in so many ways. I was originally hired to play a very specific portion of this person's life. Most of my work was with Anakin, and now I get to come back and explore the character of Darth Vader. And while you don't need Hayden for Vader, you need a mask, a big guy in a suit, and James Earl Jones' voice. What you do want, and what Hayden thinks is necessary, is you do need Hayden to show the audience the hot-headed but compassionate man who was lost when Anakin became Vader. Hayden wants to convey the feeling of strength coupled with imprisonment, power and vulnerability.
No, I agree. I'm happy Hayden gets this opportunity because he's been
Absolutely.
defined by, I'm sure his entire life, most people just think of him as Anakin Sky. Most people he bumps into in the street are like, oh, that's Anakin Skywalker.
Absolutely.
They're not thinking of anything else, which, that just comes with the territory of fame, I suppose. But I am happy he gets the chance to come back and explore, because they're the same character, right? Anakin is Vader and Vader is Anakin. So it's cool that he gets to do this, even though you could argue, well, you could put anybody in the suit, and as long as you have James Earl Jones' voice, it's going to be Darth Vader, yeah.
But it's interesting that we're going to, at least I'm hoping, the way he's describing it, more introspective on Vader is really interesting. The fact of he's talking about things like strength coupled with imprisonment.
Well, yeah, he is.
He's a prisoner of the dark side now. He's a prisoner in his own body at this point.
He's a prisoner in every imaginable way.
But at the same time, he is also strong. He's powerful.
Well, that's the dark side. You don't realize you become a slave to it, and the anger is what gives you your strength.
Right.
He's a person, mentally imprisoned, physically imprisoned. He's imprisoned by the past. He's imprisoned by his regrets and mistakes. He's just anger personified, and that anger gives him power. And that's the interesting part about the dark side. You want strength, but in order to get strength, you need the misery to fuel your strength. So it kind of, that's what I love about Star Wars. It defeats the purpose. Power defeats its own purpose. You want power to be happy, but your power comes by being miserable.
Yeah, I do like the whole idea that they're going to hopefully actually convey this into this Vader.
I hope. It's not easy. It's not easy because he is a guy in a mask. Like, how often are we going to pull off the mask and look at the face of Hayden underneath? I'm sure we will at some point. The mask will come off, and in his meditation chamber or whatever, or flashbacks, or him having a dream where he doesn't have to be in the suit. That I think could be really cool. Just seeing Darth Vader, what Darth Vader could have been had he not been quote unquote mutilated by Obi-Wan.
All right, we'll move on to the last part of the massive article. This had to do with Kenobi. Chow had to fight with the Lucasfilm Brain Trust to have the rematch between Vader and Kenobi. Even, honestly, to bring Vader back at all, she had to fight with them, but ultimately got the green light. Part of her successful perspective on her why that Vader and Kenobi should face each other again may surprise even the most ardent Star Wars fans, especially those who think of the two as harboring an epic contempt for each other. She says, "For me, across the prequels, throughout the original trilogy, there's a love story dynamic with these two that goes through the whole thing. I felt like it was quite hard to not include the person who left Kenobi in such anguish in the series. What intrigued her was the idea that despite what Vader had become, Kenobi might still care deeply about him. I don't know how you could not," she says. "I don't think he will ever not care about him. That's what's special about the relationship, is that they loved each other. They were brothers. They were comrades in arms.
Well, sure.
He raised him like a father and made, and then was his brother."
He was a father figure at first and then becomes like a brother. I agree and disagree with her because if your brother murders a bunch of children and destroys everything your life was about, sure, you're always going to have this piece down deep of you that thinks of him as your brother and loves him, but he destroyed your entire life. He murdered children. He murdered the Jedi Order. He has been rampaging across the galaxy, murdering more people. I don't know that Obi-Wan needs to be convinced that like his brother is dead. That's why I think when you look to Return of the Jedi, when he's telling me, from my point of view, Vader destroyed Anakin. There is no more Anakin because he can't. I think you could even say it's a type of coping mechanism for Kenobi to think that. It's easier to think that he became Darth Vader and murdered this guy who was my brother, because my brother would never murder children. My brother would never destroy the Jedi Order. My brother would never have, torn the galaxy apart. So, I think there is a love for Anakin, but there is obviously a profound, I don't want to use the word hatred per se, because we're talking to Jedi here, but, there's a dislike of Darth Vader, right? So, I think he compartmentalizes the two, and that's what I think is kind of showcased in Return of the Jedi when he says he destroyed Anakin. So I don't know that he even thinks of Darth Vader as Anakin anymore.
But it could be somewhat. I mean, think of what Hayden had said about showing strength in imprisonment. Could Kenobi possibly see the same thing? The fact that maybe he thinks Vader is imprisoning Anakin. Like, Anakin could still be somehow set free within him and go back to who he was.
But you can't
It's not saying erasing his sins, but at least saving his brother in one sense.
There are certain things you just can't come back from, right? I mean, I am all for redemption, and everybody in this world is going to make a mistake, and some pretty big ones that are going to hurt people or just do dumb things. Everybody, I don't care who you are. If you live a life on this planet, you're going to do something stupid that hurts people. And I believe we do deserve, as long as you have, regret and, not sympathy, but, remorse for what you've done. I believe in second chances, but there are certain things that you have gone too far. And what Anakin does, he murders children. He destroys the Jedi Order.
He can't even begin on a path to redemption or atonement even unless you salvaged humanity back first.
Well, yeah,
I'm not saying he saves Anakin and Anakin gets off scot-free, but Anakin actually can begin to atone and take responsibility for what he has done.
Well, sure. I mean, the ending of Return of the Jedi to me says you always have, no matter what you have done in this life, no matter how horrible you have been, there's always the opportunity to do right. There's always the opportunity to now make the right choice. Even if you've made a million wrong choices before, you can still make that right. And in Luke's eyes, obviously, his father is redeemed to a large extent. Luke doesn't know perhaps everything Anakin or Vader has done. So he's redeemed in his son's eyes, and that's all that matters to Vader in that moment, I'd imagine, or Anakin in that moment. Like, my son sees the good person I used to be, and I mean, can Obi-Wan ever not see what Vader has done, or what Anakin has done? Can he ever not see the corpses of the children littering the Jedi Temple? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that, I have a brother, I have a sister, we all have people, or most of us have people we really care about. I mean, is there a point where you would just have to say, I can't condone what you have done, or do you just never give up on a person no matter what they've done?
That's a really hard, and that's a person-to-person type thing. It depends on their bond. It depends on everything. It's so hard to define how much a person would be able to. I mean, maybe if you're not, maybe he won't forgive him, but bringing him back to himself, maybe it erases some of his own guilt. He sees himself also as a failure in this.
I could agree with that.
As a failure for not following the signs or not helping him before it became this way. For Anakin even not trusting him. If Anakin would have trusted him with the vision from Padme more, if they would have talked about this more, maybe they could have come out with a solution that didn't involve him falling to the dark side. He may feel such an immense amount of guilt that saving, I'm putting air quotes,
yes,
saving Anakin from Darth Vader would do a good deal to heal his own wounds.
Perhaps, yeah. Like I said, I believe there's just that compartmentalizing there, that he doesn't see Anakin anymore. And I could be wrong, and perhaps what this series will try to recontextualize is why he completely gives up on Anakin. I mean, maybe there's another encounter where, and I know people want to point to this all the time, there are some lines in A New Hope, or not A New Hope, but actually Return of the Jedi, that imply that there might have been another encounter where, Obi-Wan tries to save Anakin, and that's where he learns, like, no, he's just gone. And so I'm assuming that's what they're going to go with this series, that they will have this encounter, and Kenobi will, for whatever reason, try to appeal to the better nature of Anakin and try to reach his brother, and just there's nothing there, and that's when he's like, he's more a machine now than man. Yeah, I mean, again, but do we need that? Obviously,
there's a lot of things in this world we don't need.
I was just going to say, obviously, do we need Star Wars in general? I mean, is it a necessity in life? Not exactly. I mean, for some of us fans, it feels like it is, but it's, I don't know. It's meant to be entertainment, and you got to understand. I know I have to understand sometimes too that yes, we're going to get stories that maybe we don't need within the greater context of Star Wars that people just want to see because it's cool. You kind of got to accept that, but. I've always talked about the spectacle versus substance. Do you actually have a substance to your story if you're just, throwing a spectacle out there to make some money? And so I do understand that, they're going to do things from time to time that are just more of the spectacle to get the audience. But every now and then you have to ask yourself, is this a story you really need, or would you have been better vested doing a different story with different characters? And I don't know. I'm getting way too rambly right now,
Yeah,
but
you
I think people know what I mean.
Well, we'll know for sure in a little over a week and a half.
It's close now, yeah.
A little under a week and a half.
All right, well, I guess that's all we got for you this time. Tune in tomorrow when we discuss more from this article, and maybe the next day. If it took me this long to get through just the Kenobi aspect, it might take a while to get through the whole thing. Anyway, tell us what you think about Kenobi. Tell us what you think about anything we've discussed in this video. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.